The surprise terrorist attack on Israel by Hamas militants was pre-planned and well coordinated, shaking those inside the country to the core.
We have the most advanced and sophisticated military in the world. This is the most amount of Jews that have been murdered in a single day since the Holocaust.
The failure of both Israeli and American intelligence to detect the attack ahead of time, unleashing warnings here at home.
We need an immediate assessment of our own areas of weakness and a glaring weakness in our own southern border.
Former Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy pointing to the official numbers released by U.S. Customs and Border Protection, with arrests of those on the terror watch list so far at 154, a sharp increase from 98 the year before, 16 the year before that, and just 3 in 2019 and 2020.
Why are they coming to America? What do they have planned? And who are they communicating with?
Those questions should have been asked far more in the months leading up to 9/11, according to the 9/11 Commission, which laid out countless examples of missed threats and vulnerabilities, including at our border.
The restrictions that the 9/11 Commission recommended and that were actually implemented following the terrorist attacks with respect to immigrants have almost all been abandoned. For U.S. citizens, we still live in a post-9/11 world. At the border, we don't.
Critics of the Biden administration's border policies say those policies don't appear to consider external threats from terrorists around the world. The White House pushing back.
We continue to remain vigilant about terrorist threats to the homeland from anywhere.
These concerns are now being raised as part of the immigration debate here in Washington and on the campaign trail. Some candidates even calling for the U.S. military to be immediately used to secure our border. I'm Christine Frizzau reporting.
Palestinian militants from the armed group Hamas launched a surprise coordinated attack on Israel by land, sea, and air on Saturday morning. With hundreds killed, the attack is the largest and deadliest in years and prompted an Israeli declaration of war. Here's how it unfolded. At around 6:30 a.m., the attack began with a barrage of rockets. Shortly after the first reports of rocket fire, Hamas fighters entered Israel near the Kerem Shalom crossing, an important checkpoint between Israel and Gaza. The video released by Hamas shows its fighters breaching the border fence and attacking the military base there. Around the same time, Hamas fighters also raided and captured Israel's Erez border crossing station. Targeting checkpoints like these enabled Hamas to neutralize clusters of Israeli forces and spread into nearby towns with less resistance. By 7:30 a.m., Israelis began seeing groups of Palestinian militants arriving in towns and cities. The incursion fanned out into 9 towns near the border with Gaza. In the city of 𝙎𝙤𝙧𝙖𝙤𝙧, Palestinian militants clashed in the streets with Israeli police and military. By late morning, Palestinian militants began destroying sections of the border barrier. What started as a small penetration of the Israeli border became a wide-open corridor. Soon, Palestinian militants began taking hostages in towns near the border with Gaza. Many hostages were taken back to Gaza and driven through the streets. By the afternoon, at least 200 Israelis were killed and more than 1,000 injured, mainly civilians. Israeli jets launched retaliatory strikes in Gaza, killing and injuring similar numbers of Palestinians. Hamas said their attacks were only the beginning of a long war.
As Israel's war with Gaza militant group Hamas spills into the fourth day, at this moment developments coming in from the war front, the death toll on the Israeli side, that's climbed to 900, while over 687 Palestinians have been killed. The Hamas militant group, it's now declared that it will begin executing hostages. Listen into the message that the Hamas group has released.
فإنه ومن هذه الساعة
From this moment we announce that for every attack towards our people who are safe in their homes, without previous warning, unfortunately, we will have to execute one of the civilian enemy captives that we have hostage. And we will be forced to broadcast this in video and audio. We announce this decision and we hold the responsibility in front of the whole world to the Zionist enemy and its leadership. They are responsible for this decision.
Worrying updates coming in on the hostage situation as the militants threaten to execute captured Israelis unless the Israeli strikes on Gaza are stopped. This as mediators from Qatar are still leading negotiations with the militant group since Saturday. Qatar's foreign ministry has revealed that the country is involved in mediation talks between Hamas and Israeli authorities. Till Monday, there was a possibility of a female prisoner swap. Qatar has been leading these negotiations with US involvement since Saturday last week. But what is it that Hamas wants from these negotiations? What are they looking to get in return for setting the hostages free? Several reports indicate that Hamas's first order of business at the negotiation table is securing the release of 36 Palestinian women. However, a spokesperson for the militant group has said that the objective is to secure the return of all Palestinian prisoners in Israel. Over the years, Israeli security forces have arrested and imprisoned more than 5,000 Palestinians, including women and children. Here's where the tally stands. Total number of Palestinians languishing in Israeli prisons stands at 5,200. Out of the total, 33 are women. 170 of those in jail are Palestinian children. A 2022 UN report reveals that since 1967, which is the year when Israel seized control of East Jerusalem, the Gaza Strip and West Bank, Israeli forces have arrested an estimated 1 million Palestinians. A past trend indicates that if the Palestinian prisoners are tried, they get prosecuted in Israel's military courts. And as the Israel-Hamas war rages on, nations worldwide are scrambling to find citizens who may have been killed or taken hostage when militants from Gaza surged across the Israeli border on Saturday. Israel has confirmed the attackers took soldiers, civilians hostage, but their numbers and nationalities have not been confirmed. Officials say over 100 were taken, while Hamas claims that the number stands at around 130. This Nepali family, it's mourning their children who died in the Israel-Hamas war. They were among the total of over 1,600 killed so far. According to Nepalese authorities, at least 10 Nepali students in Israel were killed during strikes. As countries begin to put evacuation plans in action, many from the ones who were abducted are believed to be foreign nationals. Mexico and Poland are among the first to deploy planes for evacuating its nationals from the war-torn country. Several countries, including the United States, Thailand, France, the United Kingdom and Nepal, to name a few, have confirmed deaths and the number of nationals missing. As the news of sexual and physical abuse of hostages starts coming out, Israel's options of retaliatory actions may become narrower. The hostages now only give Hamas the upper hand in negotiations, but it will now be used as bait and sacrificial objects against Israel. Since the exact location of these hostages remain unknown, this seems to be working in their favor.
It has been more than 72 hours since Hamas launched its biggest operation in Israel. Both the sides are firing air missiles towards each other, be it a mortar strike or a drone strike. Israel even carried out airstrikes along its northern border as it responded to the airstrikes from Lebanon. Israel also carried out deadly airstrikes and pounded hundreds of locations in Gaza. a day after suffering its bloodiest attack in decades, when Hamas fighters rampaged through Israeli towns, killing hundreds and abducting an unknown number of others. But seeing the situation unfolding in West Asia, there are fears that the conflict could quickly spread in the region. The scale of the attack has prompted fears that a wider conflict could break out between Israel and other factions opposed to it, including Lebanon's Hezbollah, an armed group backed by Iran that has previously clashed with Israel. And it's not just the fear. The Hezbollah experts have warned that the Taliban regime in Afghanistan could also join the ongoing war. Meanwhile, across West Asia, there were demonstrations in support of Hamas. While Iran and Hezbollah praised the attack, militant group Hezbollah also told Hamas that our guns and rockets are with you. On the other hand, the Western countries led by the US have denounced the attack by Hamas. While US President Joe Biden issued a blunt warning to Iran and other countries, he said that this is not a moment for any party hostile to Israel to exploit these attacks. Moreover, the war in Israel has slammed doors on the cautious US-Iran talk, while making limited headway on the key issue of Iran's nuclear program.
On Thursday, the president will travel to New Delhi, India.
In fact, days before the attack, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan pulled out a long list of positive developments in West Asia, while adding that these developments are allowing the Biden administration to focus on other regions and problems as well. But less than 2 weeks later, Hamas launched its surprise attack against Israel, leaving U.S. diplomats scrambling to try and contain the outbreak of violence from spreading in the region.
Fourteen Americans have been killed and at least 20 more Americans remain missing.
In the West Bank, thousands of Palestinians have gathered to protest Israel's continued attacks on Gaza.
And tonight, President Biden has confirmed that Hamas has taken American hostages.
Let's get right to Local 10's Glenna Milberg live in the newsroom with the latest. Glenna.
Calvin, Nicole, some of the images we are bringing you tonight are going to be hard to watch. Even as the acts of war intensify, the acts of brutal terror are just being discovered. Israeli soldiers today at one of the kibbutz communities.
It's something that I never saw in my life.
Where rampaging terrorists unleash cruelty and carnage on families Saturday morning.
Babies, their heads cut off. That's what they said. Gunned down. Families completely gunned down in their beds. You can see some of these soldiers right now comforting each other.
The images of those families, the pleas of others who survived.
Terrorists came to the door, they were throwing grenades in.
Families are taking their searches of the missing public, some with evidence their loved ones are among the 100+ hostages held somewhere in the dense maze of Gaza buildings.
The optimistic scenario here is that she's held hostage in Gaza and not dead on the street of the kibbutz where we grew up.
American citizens are confirmed to be among the hostages. U.S. lawmakers are overwhelmingly united in backing Israel's mission.
And the resolve to make sure that Hamas is never able to do something like this again is strong.
The Israeli air assault is punishing, retaliation with a mission to disable and dismantle Hamas and its terror capabilities.
The resolve is high. As we see the atrocities, it saddens and tears our hearts, but it also serves to galvanize our spirit and our focus on what needs to be done.
This has just been a relentless tempo.
Hamas has not stopped a rocket campaign into Israel today, and this time warning the target would be 𝙎𝙤𝙧𝙖𝙣, an Israeli city north of Gaza.
What did I do?
In Gaza, morgues are becoming overwhelmed. Israel's operation sparking protests today in the West Bank.
We do have a lot of ground troops in this area. We have a lot of tanks.
Though Israel is amassing troops and tanks at the Gaza border, signs a ground invasion may be to come.
The U.S. support is arriving now. American warships already staged this weekend in the Mediterranean. It is just after 1 in the morning, and in the last hour, we learned that the first plane carrying U.S. ammunition landed at an airbase in Israel just east of Gaza.
Charlie, thank you very much for joining us at the top of the show. What have you learned since you've been in Tel Aviv?
Well, today has been an extraordinary day of death and destruction. The casualty figures now hurtling into the thousands on both sides. And this has definitely become a complex and multi-fronted war in northern Lebanon, in southern Lebanon, northern Israel, in the south of Israel, on the border with Gaza, and even up to Tel Aviv, where we are. There have been attacks, both small arms fire and rockets. There's been artillery from the IDF back into Hamas-controlled areas and airstrikes into Gaza. But there have also been more disturbing reports in the south of Israel, where this morning the government claimed it had secured its border with Gaza. That now appears to have not been the case. In the last hour, 2 terrorists were killed in Mefalsim and another was killed in Sderot, areas that the IDF claimed they had cleared with paratroopers. It now seems that that might not be the case as more violence continues. In the last half hour meeting with troops, Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said that he had released all restraints and that Israel was now going into a full offense. Now, for people in Gaza, this will obviously be extremely concerning as the number of people killed there approaches 1,000 as targeted airstrikes are launched. But when some of the atrocities become made aware and some of the information coming out of southern Israel reaches the airwaves, the reason for that kind of statement will become more clear, I think, to onlookers. In the last hour, we have heard reports of up to 40 babies being killed in a kibbutz in southern Israel. I think this is the most shocking development of all of the shocking developments we have heard today. It goes beyond the standard massacre and murder that has become commonplace since Saturday. It is a new level of depravity. Many of the people that I've spoken to today, fleeing from southern Israel, fleeing from those kibbutzes, reflecting in great misery and shock at that news. The reports there from the Israeli ambulances and indeed IDF soldiers who cleared out that kibbutz. It's a devastating development.
Thank you, Charlie. Yes, extremely devastating reports if they turn out to be true. You say that Israel will be launching a full offense. What does that mean? What is that likely to mean? We're already seeing targeted airstrikes onto the Gaza area. What else could we see?
Well, in the last 24 hours, the Hamas side, they have launched many targeted rocket attacks into Israel, reaching Ashkelon, where they offered a warning an hour before they sent rockets in there. The Palestinian Islamic Jihad in southern Lebanon also launched rockets into northern Israel. And the Israeli side have reacted with dozens and hundreds of airstrikes into Gaza, especially along the coastline. But the development that is likely now over the next 24 to 48 hours is a ground assault into the Gaza Strip. This hasn't happened by Israeli Defense Forces since 2014, but it's understood that with the restraints being removed, as the Defense Minister says, and as more Israeli troops amass on that southern border with Gaza, which appears porous with terrorists crossing over, that a more direct ground invasion is likely into the Strip. And this will, of course, mean more death and more destruction and much more conflict.
Thank you very much indeed. Charlie Peters there, our reporter live from Tel Aviv, Israel, bringing us the very latest on what is escalating between Israel and Hamas.
The White House lit up in white and blue, symbolizing President Biden's commitment to Israel in the wake of Hamas's surprise weekend massacre.
So in this moment, we must be crystal clear.
We stand with Israel.
But coming from Biden's left flank, a vocal anti-Israel push. Pro-Palestinian rallies happening nationwide. At Harvard, students publishing a letter saying Israel is entirely responsible for the violence. Similar statements coming from students at Columbia and Northwestern, calling it a grievous miscarriage of justice to portray Palestinians as the aggressors. Former president of Harvard University Larry Summers tweeting, "In nearly 50 years of Harvard affiliation, I have never been as disillusioned and alienated as I am today." New York Democratic Congressman Richie Torres adding, "These hateful Harvard students are the future leaders of our society. May God help us." On Capitol Hill, progressive Democrats Rashida Tlaib and Cori Bush calling for the U.S. to cease funding for Israel, sparking intense backlash among their colleagues. New Jersey Democrat Josh Gottheimer telling Jewish Insider, "It sickens me that while Israelis clean the blood of their family members shot in their homes, they believe Congress should strip U.S. funding to our Democratic ally."
We believe they're wrong. We believe they're repugnant, and we believe they're disgraceful. There can be no equivocation about that. There are not two sides here. There are not two sides.
A Palestinian flag still standing outside Rashida Tlaib's office on Tuesday. Tlaib is the daughter of Palestinian immigrants.
There has been a shift within the Democrat Party towards Palestinians over Israelis. And I think that's the result of unrelenting media negativity towards Israel.
A Gallup poll from March showed an 11-point increase in just the past year of sympathy for Palestinians among Democrats, marking the first time sympathy for Palestinians outweighed sympathy for Israelis on the political left. In Washington, I'm Kayla Gaskins.
Israel's Iron Dome, the anti-missile system you just heard about, was first deployed in March of 2011. The military claims it has about a 95% success rate, but it was pushed to the limit during the early hours of the attack due to the sheer number of rockets fired. CBS's David Martin takes an in-depth look at how it works.
Israel says Hamas has launched more than 4,500 rockets, many of them intercepted by the Iron Dome air defense system. It has kept the death toll from going even higher. And today, President Biden promised to send more interceptors manufactured by Raytheon at about $50,000 each.
We're surging additional military assistance, including ammunition and interceptors, to replenish Iron Dome. We're going to make sure that Israel does not run out of these critical assets.
Iron Dome has been defending Israel against terrorist rockets for more than a decade.
It has been effective, as it typically is, in taking a lot of those rockets out of the sky and saving countless lives by doing so. Now, of course, some rockets have gotten through to tragic cost.
Because the flight time for a rocket is so short, Iron Dome can operate on automatic. As soon as a rocket launch is detected, an alert goes out telling everyone to run for shelter, while Iron Dome launches its interceptors, homing in only on rockets headed toward populated areas.
So it doesn't have to fire 4,500 interceptors to shoot down 4,500 rockets?
No, a significant fraction of these rockets are not going to hit anything vital.
Retired General Frank McKenzie, former commander of U.S. forces in the Middle East, says Hamas doesn't really care where the rockets land.
They've got a large stockpile of missiles, and I think we should anticipate the intensity of these attacks to continue for a few days yet.
If Hezbollah, which is based in Lebanon on Israel's northern border, unleashes its stockpile of rockets and missiles, Iron Dome could be stretched to its limit. Nora?
That is the big concern. David Martin, thank you.
Tonight, the death toll has climbed to more than 1,600 people as the fighting continues between Israel and Hamas. At least 14 Americans are among those who've died.
President Biden spoke with Israel's Prime Minister from the White House. Natalie Brand tells us more as the conflict in the Middle East continues.
Israel is carrying out punishing airstrikes in Gaza as its Iron Dome intercepts incoming missiles from Hamas. The Israeli military says the air assaults are designed to cause maximum destruction in areas where it says Hamas terrorists congregate. Hundreds of targets were hit in Hamas stronghold Ramallah. Even Gaza's main port was struck. Security experts say for Israel, this fight is unlike previous rounds with Hamas.
Israel has to win this one conclusively so that no one else, whether it's Hamas or Hezbollah or Iran, tries to test it in this way in the future.
We stand with Israel.
Speaking at the White House, President Biden reiterated U.S. support for Israel.
We will make sure the Jewish and democratic state of Israel can defend itself today, tomorrow, as we always have.
The U.S. is surging additional military assistance, including ammunition and missile interceptors. It's also sharing intelligence to help with hostage recovery. Americans are among the captives.
Hostages whom Hamas has now threatened to execute.
We are looking for our son. We have to find our son.
Laor Abramov was at the music festival that came under attack. He took refuge in a bomb shelter and is missing.
We spoke with a witness that saw him taken away on a pickup truck.
As rockets light up the night sky, there has also been deadly fire with Hezbollah along Israel's border with Lebanon, fueling concerns about the conflict expanding.
Now, along with flight suspensions, cruise liners are adjusting their scheduling in the area. FedEx also stopped deliveries to Israel, while retail stores are temporarily closed.
Right.
Yeah, he came to Washington for his PhD in international studies. Now a heartbreaking connection to Western Washington and the war that's happening on the opposite side of the country.
I think everybody's in shock.
A University of Washington graduate brutally killed over the weekend.
This wonderful human being was killed who had no malice toward either side. Or towards anyone, really. He was a beautiful human being.
Katzman's mother says he was found dead inside his apartment in Israel after Hamas soldiers burst into his home.
We understand that he and his neighbor were hiding in a closet at 2:30 a.m. on Saturday morning, that they found his body.
A distinguished scholar, his peers tell me he was passionate about his work.
I see now the importance of his work in an even greater way than when he first came.
His research focusing on the interrelations of religion and politics in the Middle East. Born in Israel, Katzman found his way to the Pacific Northwest.
He was just a really good guy. He, the sort of person I think everybody wants to get to know.
Professor James Wellman even visited him in Israel, a memory he says he's forever grateful for.
And no one knew it was coming, of course, and I had texted him, 3 or 4 days ago and said, hey, are you okay? And I didn't hear back. This weekend was heart-wrenching. I still feel tears, and I can't believe he's gone.
And his mom says the family is now working on funeral preparations. The death toll now reaching more than 1,500 people and still counting. Back to you.
Congressman Dean Phillips, along with several of our local lawmakers, have weighed in on the conflict by now in some shape or form. And Phillips says without a House Speaker in Congress, it's like America is sitting on the sidelines. When it came to a conversation about what is happening in Israel and in Gaza, Phillips said he not only condemns the attacks in Israel, but also that there is urgency in finding the next House Speaker.
To be in a position where we may not be able to act to provide support to Israel is a terrible dereliction of duty. And I really hope that my colleagues offer a solution in the form of a candidate.
Several other lawmakers have weighed in, DFLers and Republicans on the same page about condemning the attacks, but differing in terms of what should come next for America. Representatives Michelle Fischbach, Pete Stopper, and Tom Emmer saying America should stand by Israel as it defends itself, but Representatives Betty McCollum and Ilhan Omar saying, quote, war is not the answer. Omar urged the U.S. to use diplomatic might instead of continuing unconditional weapon sales to Israel. Both Omar and Phillips acknowledging those who have been killed on both sides.
I believe two things can be true at once. One can have compassion for the Palestinians, for the suffering, especially for innocent men and women and children who are going to face tragic outcomes because of this conflict. But the other thing that is true is Hamas is sworn to the destruction of Israel.
Senator Amy Klobuchar highlighting that her office is working with Minnesotans who live in Israel.
Our office has received dozens of calls of people who are very frightened, either because they're looking for loved ones that they haven't been able to hear from, or they're actually over there.
Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. It is the only place where Arabs, Jews, Muslims, Christians are treated equally
We have reached out to all of the mentioned Republican lawmakers for updated statements or interviews in person, but we did not hear back from them. Randy?
The situation is volatile and it's changing quite quickly, but here's what we know right now. The Palestinian militant group Hamas has launched a massive, unprecedented military operation from the air. They say they fired more than 5,000 rockets and long-range missiles, some of them slamming into cities in southern Israel. And you can see thick black plumes of smoke in the air, residents trying to take shelter wherever they can. Now, from the ground, images showing dozens of heavily armed Palestinians on motorbikes and also in pickup trucks infiltrating Israeli settlements near the border, also cutting through the border fence and shooting at passers-by, killing at least 22 Israelis and injuring hundreds of others. We have been hearing disturbing reports that Hamas has taken at least 35 Israelis, including soldiers, and holding them hostage. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu telling the country that we are at war and we will win. Hamas's spokesperson calling on all Palestinians to take up arms and fight. Janae.
And Lama, you have been covering this region extensively. I know you said at the top of the hour that this was likely extensively planned and could be seen as a security failure by Israel. How are people reacting there right now?
Yeah, you know, Janae, people are shocked that Hamas militants who come from one of the poorest areas in the Palestinian territories, from Gaza, which has been under siege for decades, that they have been able to carry out this sort of military operation. They are shocked by its scale and also the speed at which they have infiltrated the border, going into Israeli towns. And from talking to people on the ground, Palestinians are celebrating. They feel that they are emboldened, that they've been able to attack Israel, and they feel that there is a shift here, that this is the beginning of change. They say that this is a direct result of the attacks, of the way that Palestinians have been treated, of what they describe as Israeli aggression. So after years and years of anger, that anger, they say, has now exploded. So the violence will most likely escalate.
Back here at home, the White House is warning nations like Iran that are hostile to Israel not to take advantage of the situation. Let's go to ABC's Mary Alice Parks at the White House. Mary Alice, is the White House concerned that Iran or others might join the war against Israel?
Well, Stephanie, we heard the president not mince words. He said that the world is watching. He warned any other actor who might exploit this moment to not do so. I am told from White House sources that that was partly because of the messages from Hamas itself today, calling on others to join in the fight. The White House felt there was an urgent need to be so forceful from the president. It was interesting, in a background call with a senior White House official and reporters this evening, they did say that they don't yet have any specific indication, that it was too early to tell ways in which and whether or not the state of Iran was directly involved in planning or supporting this attack, but that they're going to be looking at it, of course, studying it very closely. But this official went on to say that there is no doubt that Hamas is funded, equipped, armed by Iran and others, and that is part of the reason they need to continue to hold Iran accountable. Stephanie.
So many questions remain, including whether there were any missed signs by U.S. and Israeli intelligence. Mary Alice, you've been there for us all day. Thank you so much.
So many Israeli casualties from the massacre at that music festival. More than 260 bodies recovered from the scene. We're hearing from witnesses. Ian Pannell is on the scene in 𝙎𝙤𝙧𝙧𝙖𝙣, Israel. Good morning, Ian.
Yeah, good morning, George. We're actually only a couple of miles away from the Gaza border. And when that infiltration, that large-scale attack happened, Hamas militants came right into the center of this town. We saw wild videos of them opening fire on civilians. Dozens were killed. And this was the police station that was overrun by militants, the scene of a pitched battle. Many people died. But as you say, the single worst incident of this entire attack was at a party just a few miles away.
This morning, a music festival in Israel packed with hundreds of young people, ending in carnage. Early Saturday morning, Hamas rockets streaking overhead as people celebrated and danced. Suddenly, panic spreading as Hamas gunmen close in. Festival goers seen in videos circulating online, running for their lives, desperately fleeing for safety.
All the people who got away fast were shot in their car.
Noam Manket survived the attack by sprinting through an open field.
So you just keep running, because you realize that if you don't keep running, then you don't go back home.
With rockets exploding overhead, Noam running for miles without food or water. She still doesn't know whether some of her closest friends made it out alive. Tom and his girlfriend Mai describing the chaos and gunfire as they try to escape.
Bullets is over your head. You hear the shot, like you hear the shot. You get down and keep running.
More than 260 people were slaughtered by Hamas. Video posted online showing what is now a terrible crime scene. But this morning, many are still missing, including John Polin's son, Hirsch.
He sent 2 brief WhatsApp messages to my wife and me. The first message said, "I love you." The second message said, "I'm sorry." Since then, we've heard nothing from him.
The family of Idan Dor are in agonizing limbo, awaiting any news about their 25-year-old son.
We're all here. No one can sleep. We have no information about Idan, nothing.
Idan first escaped the gunfire with a friend, calling his sister in panic.
When he ran and screamed that I'm running and I'm running for my life, everyone is shooting everywhere in every direction.
He ran for his life as Hamas gunned people down. His family haven't heard from either of them since.
Well, one of those young men that we spoke to, Tom, telling me that he's already received his call-up papers. He's heading in this direction, and we're getting every sense of this brooding battle. We hear the fighter jets, we hear the drones, we hear the explosions every few minutes, but we also see lots of military vehicles moving into this area with a real sense that this could escalate even further. DeMarco.
And it is far from over, and thank you for that report.
International spokesperson for the Israeli Defense Forces, Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, joins me now for more on this. Lieutenant, thank you for joining us. How did you first learn about this attack, and what was your reaction when you did?
I learned of it when rockets were fired at the place where I live in central Israel, early morning hours Saturday. And a heavy barrage of rockets, and immediately I was notified on the phone that this was a large-scale attack. Then it became apparent, it's obvious that if they're firing at Tel Aviv and central Israel, then something very big is going on. I could not imagine at that time that Hamas would have the audacity and the foolhardiness to do what they have done, to launch such an unprecedented, brutal, merciless attack on Israeli civilians, to butcher civilians in their homes as they have, and to launch an attack and cause the amount of casualties that Israel has never experienced ever in its history. It is an unprecedented attack, and it will be followed by an unprecedented Israeli response against these bloodthirsty animals that have come across from Gaza and attacked our civilians.
You say unprecedented Israeli response. What do you mean by that?
I mean that according to the directives given by the Israeli government, the task of the IDF in this war, and this is a war, this is not another round of fighting, this is not rockets being fired at southern or central Israel, and then some retaliations, and then some half-cooked ceasefire under Egyptian assistance. This is a totally, fundamentally different situation. And what we have been tasked to do by the Israeli government is to make sure that at the end of the fighting here, Hamas no longer possesses a military capability to threaten Israelis at all, and does not have the ability to govern the Gaza Strip. Now, what that means is, of course, for those following events and perhaps more familiar with, is that this will be a very substantial assault on Hamas's military capabilities, and that the paradigms that were relevant up until October 7th will no longer be valid.
Israel is saying that at least 100 people have been taken hostage here. What more, if anything, do you know about the condition those hostages are being kept in, and how worried are you about those people?
This is also an unprecedented situation. We've had Israeli civilians and military taken hostage by terrorists in the past, but never this amount, and together in different locations. So it is unprecedented. It is extremely delicate, and we are talking about people with families that are calling out for their return. You showed some of it, but I think it's worth mentioning. We're not talking about abducting Israeli soldiers from an IDF position. We're talking about that Hamas crossed into Israel, went to music festivals, went into houses, and dragged out from Israel into Gaza women, children, infants, elderly people, and even disabled people, along with younger Israelis, men and women. So it is an atrocity at a magnitude that we have never seen before. And I don't think that any country has suffered such a horrible situation. It will, of course, influence the future decisions made by the Israeli government and the military, how to deal with the situation. The only thing I know now is that there are no negotiations ongoing, and what the IDF is doing is preparing to deliver a long and sustained, extremely powerful campaign against Hamas for the atrocities that they have done.
All right, IDF spokesperson Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Conricus, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
The U.S. is responding to the war in the Middle East as President Biden pledges his support for Israel and warns its adversaries not to take advantage after a surprise attack by Hamas over the weekend. The U.S. is also ramping up security after the attacks. ABC News White House correspondent Karen Travers and ABC News senior investigative reporter Aaron Katersky join me now for more. Karen, an NSC official says at least 9 Americans were killed in Israel. What do we know about that?
Diane, we don't know more details about who those 9 Americans are and how and where they were killed. But administration officials are warning that that number could rise as more is discovered. Deputy National Security Advisor John Feiner was on ABC's Good Morning America this morning and said that they're doing everything they can to support those families and be in touch with them and get them what they need during this difficult time. Another thing that they're very closely watching right now is whether any Americans had been kidnapped and taken into Gaza. John Feiner did not have details on that, but said it's something they're watching very closely.
Aaron, what are law enforcement officials saying in terms of concerns about attacks here?
They're really concerned. Law enforcement officials immediately after the war began and the attacks unfolded started deploying police officers to sensitive locations, synagogues and mosques, government and cultural institutions from both the Israeli and Palestinian sides that are in the United States, and other sites that could be considered potential targets. I was out this morning at the Israeli consulate. 2 police officers, marked patrol cars, were sitting right there in front of it, because these will be places where protesters could gather, but they could also be places where people would do harm. And there's a fear of lone actors trying to take inspiration from what they see is going on overseas, but also organized groups maybe also looking to capitalize.
And Karen, the administration says it's too soon to know if Iran played a formal role in this Hamas attack. But Secretary Blinken says Hamas wouldn't be Hamas without the support it gets from Iran. So how do you go about unpacking Iran's role here, and why is that so important?
Yeah, it's important to know that the White House right now is saying that it does not have direct information that shows Iranian involvement in the ordering or planning of this Hamas attack. But a senior administration official had said over the weekend to reporters, Hamas is funded, equipped, and armed by Iran. So they're also not holding back from pointing a little bit of blame in that direction, but still officially saying there is nothing right now directly indicating Iranian involvement. John Feiner, that national security advisor, did say this morning that there is broad complicity, but no direct evidence right now or direct support. And he said that's something the Israeli government continues to say, too. So signaling that the U.S. and Israel are in lockstep on how they're approaching this. But very important that they are not confirming right now that Iran was behind this, but almost saying, look, in the past, we have seen what Iran has done, given and supported for Hamas. And this is something that they have to keep exploring right now.
And Aaron, a new assessment from the NYPD obtained by ABC News says the attacks against Israel will likely result in additional reciprocal acts of targeted violence and will be heavily exploited in violent extremist propaganda. What does that mean? What do you make of that?
It means the images that we've all been seeing on our screens, whether the smoke rising from Gaza or the torturous aftermath of kidnappings and hostage takings in Israel, those images could inspire people who would do harm, and whether they become radicalized by them or whether they see something of themselves in them and in this fight, that's really worrying to law enforcement, because it's those lone actors that they have the most difficulty in tracking. It also means, quite frankly, that a country that was already grappling with an uptick in anti-Semitic attacks and hate crimes overall, the fear now from the NYPD assessment that we obtained is that this is only going to make that worse.
Karen, the president spoke several times with Prime Minister Netanyahu. The White House also reached out to other leaders in the region. They're trying to figure out a way to contain this violence, to de-escalate this. What do we know about those conversations?
Yeah, the president spoke both Saturday and Sunday with the Israeli prime minister and promised that he would be in very close contact with with Prime Minister Netanyahu going forward. And the White House is making it very clear that the U.S. stands with Israel, that the Israelis have the right to defend themselves and their people, and that is something the president conveyed in those conversations with the prime minister. But in terms of that outreach to other countries in the region and partners in Europe, this is all about trying to contain this violence. Big concerns about this spreading beyond Israel at this point, and what that means for regional stability. That's a big concern for the administration. The president said he talked personally with the King of Jordan on Saturday and has tasked his senior national security team to be in touch with top leaders in all of the countries around Israel. But this is something that they are very concerned about, and the president will continue that engagement, as he said, with the prime minister very closely.
All right, ABC News White House correspondent Karen Travers and ABC News senior investigative reporter Aaron Katursky, thank you both.
This morning, the White House confirms Americans are likely among the hostages taken by Hamas militants.
Sorry.
White House spokesperson John Kirby getting emotional during an interview discussing the images coming out of Israel.
There's been a lot of death and destruction in that region, but I've never seen anything like this.
Sorry, it's very, excuse me, very difficult to look at these images.
President Biden will speak this afternoon about the conflict as lawmakers respond with condemnation and pledges of support. Senator Lindsey Graham even threatening to target Iran's oil infrastructure in retaliation for Iran's funding of Hamas.
For every Israeli or American hostage executed by Hamas, we should take down an Iranian oil refinery. The only way you're going to keep this war from escalating is to hold Iran accountable.
The White House says there is no direct evidence tying Iran to Saturday's attack. Meanwhile, the administration is warning about another militant group, Hezbollah, which controls southern Lebanon along Israel's northern border. A senior U.S. defense official tells ABC News, "We are deeply concerned about Hezbollah making the wrong decision and choosing to open a second front to this conflict." The attack has threatened to undermine President Biden's foreign policy goals, derailing his efforts to broker a deal to normalize relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Experts say disrupting that deal was one goal of the Hamas attack. A Palestinian activist sitting down with ABC's Lindsay Davis discussing a possible path forward.
I've always said, if Israel doesn't want two-state solution, does not want us to be free and end occupation, then let's live together in one democratic state with equal rights.
And it comes as Republicans remain divided on who will be the next Speaker of the House, even after a 3-hour meeting last night. Without a Speaker, the House is unable to pass emergency aid for Israel.
The war is prompting the largest call-up of military reserves in Israel's history. 300,000 people called into duty. Matt Gutman is live on the scene at a border town in Israel, liberated moments ago, with just a glimpse at the devastation and destruction. Good morning, Matt.
Hey, good morning, Lindsay. I want you to see the scene here. This town of Kfar Gaza was just liberated this morning. We saw medics pulling bodies out of these homes. You can see everything is burned inside. There are bullet holes everywhere. The smell of death everywhere we go. This was the youth village, and you can just see and hear those explosions overhead, the bullets pocking these buildings. We are told that dozens and dozens of people were slaughtered right here.
This morning, 300,000 Israeli reservists flooding the fields around Gaza. It's the largest and quickest call-up in Israel's history. Armored personnel carriers cutting through the dust to the border with Gaza, roads clogged with tank carriers, reservists huddled at gas stations. The Israeli military telling me the immediate goal to strip Hamas of military capabilities.
How long is Israel willing to fight this war?
As long as it takes.
Officials telling me they expect high casualties on both sides and the grim task of war requiring almost all of Israel's able-bodied reservists. Even people like 𝙎𝙎𝙧𝙧𝙖𝙣, already traumatized by Saturday's coordinated attack by Hamas that left more than 900 dead. Moshe helped save 2 innocent concert-goers at that music festival massacre.
It was a slaughter, just people with no ability to defend ourselves.
He says his military unit has given him a couple of days to process, and then it's off to the front lines.
I wait that I feel ready to go there to fight with my friends.
As the troops move in, so many residents bundling up what they can and moving farther from the rockets. We saw their fiery evidence everywhere.
We just arrived here. It looks like a rocket slammed into this industrial zone. It looks like warehouses, garages in there. Obviously setting fire to that warehouse. Gives you a sense of the size of that rocket. They completely obliterated that building behind me.
As we tried to drive away another barrage of rockets, we dove in the dirt.
Here the interceptions are coming out right now. There's a shelter here. An interception just over our head.
And you can see those men behind me. Those are sappers. They're still working to defuse some of the booby traps, the grenades, the RPGs that have been left behind here. This is very much an ongoing situation. We heard small arms fire earlier, many explosions and rockets overhead. And this is just the beginning of what is going to be a very long and very bloody conflict here. Robin.
Thinking of you, Matt, and all that are there in that region.
I want to bring ABC's Inez de la Quatara in Tel Aviv for more on this. Inez, we're just learning now that Israeli Defense Forces say one of their aircraft hit and killed 2 senior Hamas leaders overnight. What's the latest on that?
Hey, Diane. Yeah, I mean, the IDF strikes on Gaza continue, relentless strikes on Gaza. The IDF saying they are specifically targeting Hamas targets, Islamic Jihad targets. They say they've struck a weapons storage unit, a Hamas operational center inside a mosque. But of course, as they're doing that, they're also striking civilians. The Palestinian death toll rising. We are now at over 760 Palestinians killed and close to 4,000 injured. Hospitals have been hit. We're learning now that border crossings are also being hit. Lots of concerns for the civilian population inside of Gaza as the IDF continues to lay siege to the region. They're cutting off all fuel, food, electricity, and now water to the region. That is the first time that's happened. That is truly unprecedented. And so lots of concerns for that, what that's going to mean for this civilian population that is essentially trapped there. They cannot leave Gaza Strip.
Now, and as Israeli airstrikes are targeting the Gaza-Egypt border crossing now, could that lead to a wider conflict? And what does it mean for people who can't leave?
Yeah, I think that's a big concern going forward, whether this could spill over into other parts, other fronts. White House spokesperson John Kirby this morning on GMA did say that the U.S. is concerned about a second front opening up on the Lebanese border. He says that as of now, they haven't seen any indication that that's happening. The concern there would be that Hezbollah could get involved. But as of now, that's not happening. Israeli media reporting that Israel actually sent a message to Hezbollah via French President Emmanuel Macron, warning Hezbollah not to get involved and saying that if they do, Israel will begin striking both Lebanon and Syria. You mentioned Egypt as well. That I think Israeli-Egyptian relations are a big concern here as well. We know Egyptians were shocked with everything that is going on in Gaza. And so some concerns, yeah, that this could spill over here. We'll have to see. But again, for now, no indication that that's happening, Diane.
All right, Inez de la Quatara in Tel Aviv. Thanks, Inez.
Like, Gaza's worst fears at the moment is the sun setting, basically. Because once the sun sets and the night comes, things start to get, like, really aggressive. And aggressive is an understatement, to be honest. When I say, like, the neighborhoods have been wiped away, the streets are kind of, like, damaged all over the place. So it was really hard to get around, to just, like, find a way to reach the bakery, the supermarket. The only way we can prepare is to reduce our use of everything. So we're very cautious of everything. We use every light, every water bottle, everything. What people don't know about the concept of shelters is that it doesn't really exist in Gaza. I mean, people barely have homes. So shelters, that's not an option. It doesn't exist. Like, there are no shelters in Gaza, and there are no places that are guaranteed to be safe. When it comes to food supplies, it's so hard to supply enough because electricity barely comes. We've had electricity for 3 hours now for 2 days. So, like, very few electricity hours. So we're surviving on batteries and just, I don't know how we're doing it, but like, we're trying to survive in a way or another. We're just like trying to survive. I don't know how mom is doing it. That, like, my mom is one of the most resilient people I've ever seen. I mean, I don't know how she's able to manage all of the house during these tough situations, but we are.
Reporting across Israel and from Washington, and we begin tonight with ABC's Matt Gutman and what our team witnessed in an Israeli community, a kibbutz, near the border with Gaza just today. And we warn you, this is difficult.
Tonight, the world's first direct glimpse inside a massacre. The brutality Hamas unleashed on Israeli villages around Gaza.
This is the town of Kfar Aza. There are military jeeps, tanks everywhere. We understand that there were dozens and dozens of people killed here. There may still be bodies out in this town right now.
The military only now able to see the full extent of the horror that unfolded in this leafy kibbutz, home to so many young families.
You see the babies, the mother, the fathers in the bedrooms, in the protection rooms, and how the terrorists kill them. It's not a war. It's not a battlefield. It's a massacre.
It was early Saturday when Hamas terrorists burst through the gates.
So right there, I don't know if you can see, there's that breach in the fence. That's where they came in, driving motorcycles like this, and they took this entire side of the kibbutz by surprise there.
Today, we are with the soldiers as they go door to door, bringing out the murdered.
It's the incredibly grim task that these soldiers have of wrapping up a body right in that room.
Zipping up the body bag, and then we hear soldiers praying. The victim carefully eased through the window.
So you don't even know how many people have been killed here?
No. I can imagine that more than 100 of them.
You think more than 100 in this village right here?
And all of them here in the rooms, in every apartment, you can feel.
They're literally right around us in the rooms, dead bodies, their bodies.
Body, and you know, see, if they lock themselves, they burn the apartment.
They burn the apartments.
They shoot them, they shoot the baby, they cut their head.
They describe unimaginable horror here, and today, President Biden addressed it before the American people.
It's abhorrent. The brutality of Hamas, these bloodthirstiness brings to mind the worst rampages of ISIS. Parents butchered using their bodies to try to protect their children. Stomach-turning reports of babies being killed. Entire families slain.
And as Israel retaliates with missiles raining down on Gaza, the president making America's position crystal clear.
Israel has the right to respond, indeed has a duty to respond to these vicious attacks. Let there be no doubt, the United States has Israel's back.
But here, this small kibbutz seems frozen in that hellish moment.
Every single house in this area has been obliterated, either by fire or gunfire. There are the bodies of militants still here on the ground. You can smell the smell of death. Everything is charred, and where it's not, there are bullet holes in people's apartments here. And everywhere you look, the bodies of militants.
The further we went, the deeper the depravity. A child's bed drenched in blood.
This is the youth area of the kibbutz. They breached and they came in and slaughtered. You're seeing the slaughter here. Very important to see. They came in and killed civilians.
When you're saying slaughter, the general...
Slitting throats, taking off heads, grenades.
And in addition to the dead here, there are the missing. People kidnapped from their homes, now among the more than 150 hostages taken into Gaza. Tonight, President Biden with the somber news that a number of Americans have also been taken by Hamas.
As president, I have no higher priority than the safety of Americans being held hostage around the world.
Matt, just awful what you witnessed today here in Israel, and you were telling us about another story emerging in that kibbutz. You learned more about a young couple that hid their 10-month-old twins, and those babies survived because of it.
The babies survived, David, but their parents were murdered in their home by Hamas. They had tried to barricade themselves inside, but they did manage to hide their children well enough that they weren't discovered until more than 10 hours later by rescuers, unharmed. David.
Matt Gutman leading us off here in Israel tonight. Matt, thank you.
For more on the fallout from Hamas's surprise attack on Israel, we are joined by Victoria Coates, former Deputy National Security Advisor for the Middle East and Vice President of Foreign Policy at the Heritage Foundation. Victoria, thank you so much for joining us with your insights as this is unfolding now for many, many hours. I want to get your thoughts on the sophistication, the scale of this, and how it was missed by Israel as well as the United States, which is a great partner, particularly when it comes to sharing intelligence. Your thoughts?
Well, thank you, Molly. And yeah, that's really the staggering thing is the scale and the sophistication of this attack, which could only be carried out if a terrorist group like Hamas, which is a non-state actor, has a nation-state sponsor, and that sponsor is Iran. Absent Iran, there's no way they can pull this off. And so we know Iran is taking all of the money that's been flowing to it for the last 2.5 years with the permissive attitude toward its oil sales to communist China and pouring that into fueling an unprecedented terrorist operation against innocent Israeli civilians.
Victoria, it's Griff Jenkins. I have a question for you because now the world is wondering who is behind this and why now? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, thanks, Griff. It's very clearly, Iran. This is Tehran lashing out at Israel, but also with a very specific purpose and at a very precise time. 50 years after the Yom Kippur War, obviously, is a momentous anniversary, but also coming on the heels of the very open declarations by both Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman of Saudi Arabia and Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel of how close they were getting to a truly historic peace deal to bring prosperity and security to their citizens. The Iranians hate that. That's a worst case scenario for them. So clearly they've been plotting this for some time, but when they saw an imminent deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel, they decided to pull the trigger.
Victoria, I think you're raising something I've been wondering about because of how big this is, how broad, how coordinated, the swath of land that they're covering, the land incursion as well as from the air, from the sea. How long has the planning gone on for? You're talking about some of these other elements, diplomacy that are happening around the world, and perhaps, this is a longtime enemy that's always plotting to some degree and has called for the end of Israel. But how are they able to do it at this moment, as you mentioned, when these historic deals were on the cusp?
I think it's because they've been fattened up with additional resources over the last couple of years. I remember in the spring of 2017, 2018 timeframe, visiting Gaza with your former colleague, Heather Nauert, when we were both in the Trump administration. And we went and saw all of the terrorist installations, the tunnels going into southern Israel from Gaza that were being uncovered and destroyed. And we had a real period of calm there for a while because Iran was being starved of resources. We had the maximum pressure campaign, the most significant economic sanctions in a generation, to keep the money out of the hands of Tehran, because when they get this money, Molly, all they do is spend it on terrorism. You can see an almost dollar-to-dollar equivalence. If you unfreeze funds, if you let them sell oil, they spend that money on violent mayhem in the region, and they spend that money on attacks on Israel.
Victoria, just in the last 30 seconds we've got left, let's talk about the escalation ladder and what we're going to see. Obviously, Netanyahu's primary triage at the moment is to take back those territories and towns from this ground invasion, but then he's promising an unprecedented price Hamas will pay. What does that look like?
Yeah, it has to be a full-out campaign against Hamas as if they were a state actor in this case. And it has to be a full-out campaign against this spreading Iranian influence. The White House, through its Office of Palestinian Affairs, their first response this morning was to call for restraint. That's the last thing the Israelis need to hear. They need to hear that the United States has Israel's back and will support in every way possible what they have to do to keep their country safe.
Great insight. Victoria Coates, thank you for taking time. Please come back to us if you have any more developments. We appreciate it. Let's bring in Robert Greenway, former Senior Director for Middle Eastern and North African Affairs at the National Security Council, also a principal architect of the historic Abraham Accords. He's now the President and Executive Director of the Abraham Accords Peace Institute. Thanks very much for taking the time to be with us, Robert. Are you, first of all, surprised at the strength and the ferocity of this attack?
Well, it's good to be with you, John, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. Condolences to those in Israel and those in the United States that are mourning the loss of loved ones. The images are really tough to watch. To answer your question, it is a surprise in one sense that this is an attack that definitely mirrors that of 9/11 for Israel. And so it's important that we show our support. On the other hand, we've been pursuing a contradictory policy, and I think that what we're witnessing now is a real decision point. We have to decide, I think, to choose who we will support in the Middle East. We can't support both Israel and Iran, and hopefully we'll make the right choice and stand with Israel in their hour of need. And I think that's the disposition of most of the American people and most policymakers and government officials.
Do you think the outreach that the White House has been making to Iran with the prisoner exchange, that kind of thing, is that reflective of the kind of idea, the kind of policy that you think we should avoid?
Yeah, there's no doubt, John. I think that's the way the region reads it. If you look at it from their perspective, we provided almost unlimited resources to the regime since 2021. After the election and President Biden took office, we lifted restrictions and started enforcing sanctions. And so where they once enjoyed less than $4 billion of accessible foreign exchange reserves, they now enjoy over 70. They were selling maybe 400,000 barrels a day of oil at $55 a barrel. That's now well over 3 million barrels a day at $85 a barrel. We've given them the oxygen they need to breathe. And with that comes support for their surrogates and proxies, including Hamas, but also Hezbollah and the entire constellation of surrogates. And so most in the region look at this as though the United States were paying for it. And in a sense, they're very correct. Not only that, Iran has been attacking U.S. as well as our partners and allies. Testimony early this year indicated 83 attacks, for which the United States only responded to 4. And so you can understand how we would have invited this sort of aggression, and weakness always does.
But specifically regarding the money, you probably heard in Jennifer Griffin's reporting just now, the White House is saying that the $6 billion that was released to Iran as a result of that prisoner exchange, it hasn't actually reached their pockets yet. Your response?
Well, 2 points. First is oil sales and lack enforcement of sanction has given Iran unprecedented amount of access to resources already by the administration's policies and the pursuit of those policies. Second, the $6 billion sitting in Doha, for all we know, is a guarantee. And once you know something is sitting in your account, it changes the way you pursue your financial engagements. They know now that they have $6 billion waiting for them that they will be able to use and offset the cost of supporting surrogates. So I don't think it's entirely accurate to state that that $6 billion is not going into the hands of terrorists. I think ultimately that is exactly where it's headed. But more importantly, that's a fraction of what we've already provided to the regime in Tehran.
Very quickly, how should Israel respond?
Well, I think there's no doubt that they're going to launch a large-scale operation in Gaza to eliminate Hamas as a threat. Second, I think that that is likely to risk regional escalation, and we would expect, I would anyway, Hezbollah to become involved. And then the Iranian proxies in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen also could, which makes the United States the critical player here. We could put brakes back on this and stop this now and hold the escalatory spiral, or things are going to get out of control very quickly.
Robert Greenway, let's hope we can stop it now. We appreciate your expertise. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fox News alert this morning: Israel is reeling as Hamas murders hundreds while abducting innocent women, children, and soldiers right off the streets. Our next guest witnessed the attacks firsthand and today will be attending the funeral of a close friend's son, an IDF soldier murdered while defending his country. Israeli tour guide Robbie Berman joins us live. Robbie, I'm so sorry for the loss of your friend's son. How's he doing today?
Oh, the funeral, we haven't even had the funeral yet, so I don't know. I've not been in touch with them. And another friend in Efrat, his son was kidnapped. One of the soldiers was kidnapped. So It's really a very sad day for the whole country. Yeah.
Wow. And no updates yet on the location of your other friend whose son was kidnapped?
No, but I live in Tel Aviv, in the heart of Tel Aviv, and right now, as we're talking, I have a perfect view of 𝙎𝙤𝙧𝙧𝙖𝙣 Hospital, and there are military helicopters landing every few minutes, unloading the wounded and then going back out to pick them up again. So this is an ongoing thing. The terrorists have not been cleaned outside of Israel. They're still terrorists in Israel. This is a huge, not just an intelligence failure, it's a huge military and political failure, but more military. How is it possible that they were managed to kill all the people, all the outlook posts, kill the soldiers, kill them in their sleep? And there's still, as we speak now, just a few hours ago, a woman said that she received a phone call from her niece, who's 8 years old, and said she's hiding inside her kibbutz. They have killed mommy and daddy. She's hiding with her 4-year-old brother underneath the bed. They've been there for hours. No one's coming to get them. I mean, this is an ongoing failure, an ongoing tragedy. Hundreds of people have been killed. Over 100 people have been kidnapped and brought into Israel. And these are old women, young children, young people going to the music fair. This is a tragedy. I think David Friedman was correct that this is kind of a Pearl Harbor. And I feel so bad for the innocent Palestinian women and children in Gaza, but there's going to be a lot of people who are going to die. This is a war. This is war. This is a full-time war. And this was done on the anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, and it exactly was like Yom Kippur. It was a bigger scale because at least in Yom Kippur War, it was the soldiers that bore the blunt, but here it was civilians that bore the blunt, and hundreds of Israelis have been killed. It's unbelievable. It's an act of war, and things are not going to be good here in this country for many, many months to come. And I will not be surprised that if in 6 months there's a committee of an inquiry, and the prime minister and the defense minister and the head of the chief of staff and the head of the Shabak, Ronen Bar, all have to resign, because it's a failure of massive proportions, intelligence, military, and political.
Well, Robbie, that just breaks my heart. You just mentioned a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old hiding
under a bed, looking at their parents on the floor, swimming in their own blood, saying they're not moving, they're dead, what do we do, where are the police? People have been calling the police, and the police don't pick up the phone. You know why? Because the police in that area were attacked and they were killed. 30 policemen in one station were killed. This is a massive, this is an act of war of a scale that we haven't seen. In the Lebanon war that Israel had in 1983, for the whole 6 months war, only 670 soldiers, Israeli soldiers, died. We've had over 350 people die on the first day.
Wow.
This is huge.
Robbie, stay safe. A former colleague of mine in the Trump administration is in Tel Aviv too, and he mentioned having to go up and down with his 6-year-old daughter between a bomb shelter and his residence. Absolutely tragic.
It's such a tragedy because people are dying. More people are going to die. We're spending trillions of dollars on nonsense. It's not going to get us closer to peace. It's not going to get Hamas closer to what they want. The GDP plummets. I'm a tour guide. I've given back last night probably about $6,000 in deposits. People are canceling left and right. This whole thing is just awful for everybody.
Robbie,
and the people that died, innocent people have died. It's terrible.
My heart is with Israel right now. We will be praying for you as you attend that funeral today. Thank you very much, Robbie Berman.
Thank you.
Let's go to Fox correspondent Trey Yingst on the ground in southern Israel. And Trey, tragically, you've seen some gruesome scenes in this Hamas surprise attack.
Yeah, Howie, I'm going to have my cameraman pan the camera here. We're just getting some rocket fire coming off the Gaza Strip as we talk. The scenes we have witnessed throughout the war, really just brutality against the Israeli people. It is nonstop fire from Gaza. Yesterday, a massacre committed against the Israeli population. The latest numbers that we have, more than 600 Israeli civilians and soldiers. You can hear those explosions in the distance. Interceptions by Israel's missile defense system, the Iron Dome. We do know that as this rocket fire from Gaza continues, we expect fire to continue from Lebanon, and it has created a difficult situation for Israeli forces as they face a multi-front conflict. This morning, rockets and mortars were fired by the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah. opening up this conflict to a broader regional conflict. The Israeli military says they will do everything possible to get their civilians back, but we do know more than 100 Israeli civilians and soldiers are currently taken prisoner of war inside the Gaza Strip, taken yesterday by those Palestinian militants.
Hey everyone, I'm Emily Campagno. Catch me and my co-hosts Harris Faulkner and Kaylee McEnany on Outnumbered every weekday at 12 p.m. Eastern, or set your DVR. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page for daily highlights.
Where we're joined by 𝙎𝙤𝙧𝙖𝙣𝙬, who serves as Israel's ambassador to the UN, here on the couch with us in New York. Happy to have you with us this morning. Obviously, our thoughts, our prayers with your entire nation. What can you tell us this morning is the latest of what's happening in Israel?
Thank you for having me. These are devastating days for all Israelis. And as you showed your viewers, the numbers are unfathomable. I mean, we experienced an unprecedented attack during our Jewish holidays, on the Jewish Sabbath. I mean, hundreds of Israeli civilians were butchered in the streets. Grandparents and the elderly were taken, dragged from their homes into Gaza. Mothers with their babies, sometimes only the babies, were taken hostage. It's really unfathomable. And 600, I hope everyone understands, 600 fatalities in Israel proportionally is like having here 20,000 American fatalities. 20,000 people who are being butchered, massacred by these savage terrorists. It's our 9/11. We should all understand it. It's our 9/11, and from today on, things will never be in Israel as they were. But we are strong. We are a resilient people. We've gone through hardships, and we will win also this war. We will prevail.
You know, Ambassador, you just put that into a really interesting perspective. So the equivalent of 20,000 Americans, your 9/11, you know, we fought back after our 9/11. What do you think when you hear a Democratic congressman in this country, 𝙬𝙀 Omar, say, you know, it's time for a ceasefire?
I'm not going to comment directly to 𝙬𝙀 Omar. I said many times in the past what I think about the squad and their anti-Semitic views. We're not going to listen to anyone right now. We are fighting for our people. You know, today we have the Security Council of the UN that will be convened. We expect everyone, those who support the democratic values, liberal values, we expect all of them to support Israel, to condemn explicitly Hamas, and to say that they support 100% our right to defend ourselves. We don't want any lectures now explaining us how to do it, what means to use. We are going to use every means at our disposal, because you know what? We are fighting exactly like you fought against ISIS or against Al-Qaeda. These barbaric terrorists, they have the same ideology. Hamas, we should all understand who is Hamas. They're not looking to compromise or to have a dialogue with Israel. They only want to annihilate the one and only Jewish state. Their charter says, it's loud and clear, you should butcher every Jew that you meet. And that's what they did on the Jewish holiday. They butchered, like during the Holocaust, you know, hundreds of kids, babies. Our daughters are missing. There are so many people who are still missing. And we are now, you know, we are committed now to prevent these atrocities from happening again. And we will do it.
Do you believe you'll get that support from both the current administration in the United States and the UN? When you look at the UN, the amount of resolutions they pass that focus on Israel, condemning Israel, do you really believe they'll coalesce at this moment? Will you have the space necessary to get the retribution that Israel needs?
Look, I'm not naive, and I've been serving and representing Israel at the UN for the last 3 years. I know all the moral distortions of the UN and the automatic majority against Israel. But today we expect everyone, and first and foremost, you know, the free world, the democratic world. Israel is at the forefront of fighting terrorism, of fighting radicalism. We can all see the terrible pictures coming from Israel every day. So I'm not naive, but I hope that this time they will all understand what needs to be done, and that is full support, full backing to the State of Israel in our fight against terrorism, exactly as we were all united to back and support the free world, the democratic world, when we all needed to eliminate ISIS, because we realized they want to annihilate us, our way of living, our values. That's what we are facing now in Israel, coming from Gaza.
So you'll be asking for full support for what needs to be done, in your words. So what does need to be done?
It's a very tough and hard question, because obviously I cannot share our military's plan on TV. We don't want them to be prepared. But as you said, and I believe everyone understands, that we don't want to hear these calls to restraint, for calm of both sides. We keep hearing these, and it's coming basically from the UN and the UN's leadership, these immoral equation between the barbaric terrorists, those who attacked us, and Israel, the democratic, the only democracy, liberal democracy in the Middle East that is defending its civilians from these barbaric terrorists. We don't want to hear these calls. We're not going to listen to them. We're going to use every means at our disposal in order to fully obliterate the terrorist infrastructure of Hamas. And this time it must happen, because it's about our existence, it's about our future as the one and only Jewish state in the world, in the Middle East, surrounded by enemies.
Ambassador, it's unfathomable. You know, the administration I worked for, the Trump administration, you were there on that beautiful sunny day, September 15th, 2020, when we had peace accords coming since 1996, first time since 1996. And now here we are, September of 2023, a much different story.
I'm Steve Doocy. I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.
And we do have breaking news for you. A U.S. military official telling Fox News the U.S. is moving Navy ships and military aircraft closer to Israel. Again, a U.S. military official telling Fox News the U.S. is moving Navy ships and military aircraft closer to Israel. This is as we continue to follow what some in Israel are calling their 9/11. So far, at least 600 reportedly killed in yesterday's savage attacks by Hamas terrorists. And we are learning more about the U.S. military, again, what they're doing in response. We have Lucas Tomlinson. He is live at the White House. And as soon as Lucas is ready to get in front of the camera, we'll take you there. Lucas, what more can you tell us? I want to ask you, what is this signal and where were these Navy ships stationed?
Well, Arthel, you had the USS Bataan. That's an amphibious assault ship that was already on station in the Persian Gulf. That ship will have 2,000 Marines on board and dozens of aircraft. It is not an aircraft carrier, though. It'll have the VSOL, the vertical short takeoff and landing aircraft. That would be like a Harrier, a Marine Corps Harrier, also Joint Strike Fighter. You also have those Vipers. Those are Marine Corps attack helicopters, similar to some of our older viewers know the Cobras, and also Huey gunships. So those will be in the Persian Gulf. Not quite clear if they're going to be leaving the Persian Gulf, but however, of course, what's right there? You have Iran, so you'd want to make sure a naval presence is right there. Now, you also, in the Mediterranean, you have the USS Gerald Ford Strike Group. You have any kind of aircraft carrier strike group will have a number of Navy escorts. You'll have cruisers. You'll have guided missile destroyers, and normally, even though the Navy doesn't talk about it much, you'll also have a submarine as well. Now, the big question is, will Hamas know that these ships have been moved closer? You know, right now, it appears only the Israeli forces would know this, and also, of course, through the press reports. But, you know, how close are those going to get? Of course, territorial waters extends 12 miles offshore. it's not likely you're going to have a U.S. warship on the horizon, Arthel. So this appears to be a very symbolic move. But there is some concern on Capitol Hill if there are American hostages that Hamas captured yesterday. Will the U.S. military spin up and deploy Tier 1 Special Operations Forces, hostage rescue forces, to aid Israel in the recapture of, again, potentially American hostages? Secretary of State Antony Blinken was on the Sunday shows earlier. He said that is a possibility. These are reports right now. We cannot confirm that independently. They're running this down. Did Hamas also capture American citizens? Of course, American citizens perhaps with dual nationality, Arthel.
Yeah, and we're looking live here. It's 7:56 p.m. local time in Gaza. Explosion is still happening. This war is red hot, Lucas. You said this is symbolic. We will see how the follow-through unfolds. Thank you very much, Lucas Tomlinson.
And first to 𝙎𝙤𝙧𝙖𝙣𝙬, live on the ground in southern Israel. Trey, I've been watching your reporting all weekend. You're doing an amazing job. It was highly suspected that Iran was behind this. If this Wall Street Journal report is true, that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps was the mastermind behind this, that's a whole new ballgame.
John, that's exactly right. It raises brand new questions about how exactly the Israeli military will respond. There were suspicions that Iran was involved in the coordination of this widespread attack. There were just too many elements that went right for the Palestinian militants entering Israel and slaughtering these innocent civilians. At this hour, we have more breaking news. It appears Hamas militants have re-entered the southern city of 𝙎𝙤 and are engaging Israeli troops there. We were inside 𝙎𝙤 earlier today, where we saw what was left from the carnage. This weekend, blood in the streets, windshields strewn with bullet holes, and Hamas leaving behind the equipment that they brought into Israel. Here in the town of 𝙎𝙤, you can see one of the pickup trucks used by Hamas fighters to infiltrate into southern Israel. In the back, the gear that they brought with them. You can even see some of the clothes that they were wearing at the time. These militants massacred many civilians in 𝙎𝙤. Some were taken hostage and are now prisoners of war inside the Gaza Strip. Tonight in 𝙎𝙤𝙧𝙖𝙣, there are airstrikes. This is a neighborhood in the eastern part of the Gaza Strip. Hamas says more than 150 Israeli strikes have targeted this militant area. It's important to note many of the civilians have moved inside Gaza and are staying in a variety of UN schools after receiving a warning by the Israeli military to get out and get out quickly. Throughout the day, we have seen hundreds of tanks, APCs, and other vehicles headed toward the Gaza border. Thousands of Israeli troops. They look prepared for the battle ahead. It will be a very difficult fight, a very bloody fight, but after the massacre that took place this weekend, more than 700 Israeli civilians and soldiers killed and dozens taken hostage, made prisoners of war in Gaza, these soldiers say they are ready for the fight. John.
A lot more to come on this. 𝙎𝙤𝙧𝙖𝙣 for us. Trey, thanks.
This morning, an Israeli ground invasion of Gaza appears imminent as the new war in the Middle East rages for a fourth day.
They're gearing up and they are preparing to execute their missions.
Israel now calling up a record 300,000 military reservists to respond to Saturday's surprise attack by Hamas. A spokesperson for Israeli forces tells ABC's Matt Gutman the next phase includes stripping Hamas of its military capabilities.
So it sounds like to fight them, you have to get boots on the ground in Gaza, which will create casualties on the Israeli side.
We are definitely looking at difficult and hard tasks ahead of us. The entire world is watching, and if Hamas is able to get away with murdering 900 Israelis and to see the light of another day, that isn't the message that we can afford.
An estimated 1,000 Hamas militants crossed the border into Israel, killing hundreds of people, including at least 11 Americans. Disturbing new video shows the deadly ambush of a driver fleeing a music festival under attack. Other videos show Hamas militants taking an unknown number of people hostage, driving them back to Gaza. The strip of land controlled by Hamas is home to more than 2 million Palestinians, one of the most densely populated areas on the planet. A Hamas spokesperson is now warning the group will kill one hostage for every Israeli airstrike on a civilian target in Gaza. After destroying hundreds of buildings, Israel has sealed Gaza off from food, fuel, and other supplies.
Every single thing we eat or drink or consume in terms of medicines or food or drink is strictly controlled by the Israeli military. We have no control over that. So as a result of their stringent control of Gaza, life has become literally unbearable.
Jason Shawa, a Palestinian living in Gaza, says they have nowhere to go.
It is totally walled off by Israel.
In Israel, long lines are forming at grocery stores amid concern about shortages and people living in fear as Hamas continues to hit Israeli cities and civilian areas.
Just hearing a sound of, we just had the air raid siren. There you go, you can hear the sound of an explosion overhead. I can see some smoke up there. Sounds like the noise of an intercept, perhaps from the Israeli Iron Dome defense system.
But this morning, new hope for a possible way forward. Reuters reports the Gulf nation of Qatar is in talks with both sides to potentially swap Israeli hostages held by Hamas for the release of Palestinian women and children currently held in Israeli prisons. As for the intelligence failure before Saturday's attack, Prime Minister Netanyahu denied a report that Egypt warned Israel about the attack.
الله أكبر. حط راسك يا زلمة. في الجوادر. هاي جباتهم، هاي جباتهم، جباتهم الهمس.
Explosions rumbled through the night after Israel declared war on Hamas on Saturday. Hamas, a militant group from Gaza, coordinated an unprecedented attack early Saturday on Israel by land, air, and sea, shocking the country and the world.
מה שקרה היום לא נראה בישראל. ואני אדאג שזה לא יקרה יותר. נכה בהם עד חורמה, וננקום בעוצמה על היום השחור הזה שהם עוללו למדינת ישראל ולאזרחיה.
And a senior official in Hamas said Saturday's attacks are only the beginning of the conflict.
The country right now is just going into fight mode, survival mode.
Though Israel and Hamas have been entangled in a decades-long conflict in Gaza, here's why this attack is different and what it could mean for Israelis and Palestinians.
This has never happened. Israel has fought many wars against its Arab neighbors, but it has never experienced anything like this, where Palestinians have actually come into Israel proper and committed such widespread attacks.
Hamas says it is dedicated to building an independent Palestinian state. The group controls the Gaza Strip, a densely populated Palestinian enclave that, for years, has been under Israeli blockade. The last major conflict between Hamas and Israel was in 2021, in which more than 250 people in Gaza and 14 in Israel were killed. The attacks only stopped after 11 days, when Egypt brokered a ceasefire.
Is most interesting is that in recent months, I would say that Israel has actually described Hamas as being somewhat more reasonable and more of a partner than some other elements within Palestinian society. And so it seems that whatever message they were sending to the Israelis, it was very clearly deception.
Saturday's attack holds deep significance for Israel, as the country has just marked 50 years after the Yom Kippur War.
It was October 6th, which is an attack that was launched against Israel by Syria, Egypt, and several other Arab countries, and in which Israel was completely unprepared, had a very similar experience. They were caught off guard.
Though caught by surprise, Israeli soldiers fought Saturday evening to regain control and expel militants from local towns and villages.
החמאס פתח במלחמה אכזרית ומרושעת. אנחנו ננצח במלחמה הזאת. אבל המחיר כבד מנשוא.
Rockets fired from Gaza lit up the sky Saturday night. Israeli forces used their Iron Dome air defense to intercept and destroy the rockets. The death toll from the initial attack remains unclear, as Israel scrambles to assess the situation. The UN said at least 20,000 people in Gaza have been displaced from their homes as of Saturday.
Just considering the fact that something like this is completely unprecedented, I would expect them to use all their resources, ground, air, and it's going to be devastating for the people of Gaza. I don't see any other way that this could possibly go. There's going to be a lot of lost lives all across the board.
Israel has formally declared war on Hamas, following unprecedented attacks that left hundreds dead. Hamas is a Palestinian political and militant group that emerged in 1987 during an uprising against Israeli rule. It was founded as an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood and seeks to establish an independent Islamic state in what is now Israel. Hamas is designated as a terrorist organization by several countries due to its use of suicide bombings and rocket attacks against Israeli civilians and security forces. In recent years, the group has also become active in politics, notably winning the 2006 Palestinian legislative elections and subsequently taking control of the Gaza Strip, an area roughly the size of Washington, D.C., where they have acted as the governing authority ever since. Hamas is known to be funded by groups from around the world, including Iran. However, despite speculation that an order from the U.S. government to unfreeze $6 billion in assets as part of a prisoner exchange with Iran may have indirectly aided the latest attack, Qatar, the country that brokered that deal, has confirmed those funds were not dispersed and remained unconnected to Hamas. As this story develops, Yahoo News will have the latest.
The surprise terrorist attack on Israel by Hamas militants was pre-planned and well-coordinated, shaking those inside the country to the core.
We have the most advanced and sophisticated military in the world. This is the most amount of Jews that have been murdered in a single day since the Holocaust.
The failure of both Israeli and American intelligence to detect the attack ahead of time, unleashing warnings here at home.
We need an immediate assessment of our own areas of weakness and a glaring weakness in our own southern border.
Former Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy pointing to the official numbers released by U.S. Customs and Border Protection, with arrests of those on the terror watch list so far at 154, a sharp increase from 98 the year before, 16 the year before that, and just 3 in 2019 and 2020.
Why are they coming to America? What do they have planned? And who are they communicating with?
Those questions should have been asked far more in the months leading up to 9/11, according to the 9/11 Commission, which laid out countless examples of missed threats and vulnerabilities, including at our border.
The restrictions that the 9/11 Commission recommended and that were actually implemented following the terrorist attacks with respect to immigrants have almost all been abandoned. For U.S. citizens, we still live in a post-9/11 world. At the border, we don't.
Critics of the Biden administration's border policies say those policies don't appear to consider external threats from terrorists around the world. The White House pushing back.
We continue to remain vigilant about terrorist threats to the homeland from anywhere.
These concerns are now being raised as part of the immigration debate here in Washington and on the campaign trail. Some candidates even calling for the U.S. military to be immediately used to secure our border. I'm Christine Frizzau reporting.
Benjamin Netanyahu, who's Israel's longest ever reigning prime minister, came back to power at the very end of last year, at the very end of December last year, and he put together a governing coalition that is constituted of very far-right nationalist parties and Orthodox parties, Jewish Orthodox parties, making that I think. You can say that is like the most, some would say, the most right-leaning government Israel has ever had. Some would say it is the most extreme government that Israel has ever had. And on that backdrop, right after the government was formed, Justice Minister Yariv Levin, who was a member of Benjamin Netanyahu's party, the Likud, came out and put out an announcement that he's initiating a judicial overhaul, which was basically meant to weaken the power of courts, mainly the Supreme Court, Israel's Supreme Court. And that immediately brought on very intense public protests that went on until last Saturday. So it went on for 40 weeks straight. It got bigger and bigger as time went by and as the weeks went on. And it turned out to be the biggest protest movement that Israel had ever seen. And the division was very, very big. And, it was felt everywhere because I think that in my perception, and I think many would tell you that at some point it went way beyond the controversial judicial overhaul, which is always at the foundation of things. But, it was a very big opposition to Netanyahu's government because a lot of other things that they were trying to pass through in parliament and in other ways that a big part of the public very much resented here.
And it's safe to say his political future was much in question. As he seeks a more unified government, and you understand why everyone would be rallying, behind unification, or at least everybody kind of on the same mission, if you will, in terms of any kind of retaliation. Does it change the political course of Benjamin Netanyahu?
Not necessarily. I mean, I don't think so. There's been a lot of talk that's being pushed back both by Israeli officials, Israeli politicians, leaders, and also by some, people in the general public. So there's been a big pushback, on the questions of, how this even happened, right? I mean, it's pretty amazing that it even happened to a country like Israel.
Is he being held responsible for that? What's the conversations that you are hearing there in Israel about his responsibility for missing on the intelligence side of things?
So, some people are saying that he has a big part in it. Obviously, most people think that there was, an intelligence failure here. But there is talk about, first of all, him being responsible for everything that goes on as prime minister. And also that pressure that the government had put for instance, to shift military powers from the Gaza area to the West Bank, for instance, to secure settlements, especially during the Jewish holidays that they were just coming to an end just last Saturday. So they're also saying so it's not just his overall responsibility for the situation, but actually some things that were brought on by his government, by their policies, by how much they wanted to go towards the settlements, and allow them to do things in the West Bank that needed a lot of security. So yes, he is being blamed for this.
So I just want to clarify. Are you saying, instead of focusing on the border with Gaza, potentially moving resources from that area to the West Bank?
Yes, that is part of the conversation here in Israel. I want to be clear that it is not 100% of the conversation. Not everyone is saying this, and even the people who are saying this, are not saying that this is 100% to he's 100% to be blamed for what happened. But there is talk about the specific point that I was just talking about, that because they wanted to allow settlers in Judea and Samaria to have all these ceremonies and all these events during the Jewish holiday season. They did move some military powers. They did shift them to the West Bank, and this left Gaza a little bare, as in relevance to what is usually over there in terms of military powers.
Just got about a minute or so left, 45 seconds. Galit, I can't even imagine, to be in your shoes. What are you thinking at this point as you look out towards the rest of the week?
Well, if you listen to the rhetoric of everyone, who's been speaking to us leaders, IDF officials, they're speaking about a very, very long military operation that's coming ahead. And there's a big question if Lebanon will be joining, Hezbollah in Lebanon will be joining in. And this is causing a lot of concern. I'm speaking now, of the civilians, of the general public in Israel, because, when there is a war in Israel, then the public is targeted by missiles. And when you look at Hezbollah, they're a much bigger threat in that sense than Hamas. People are concerned, and it's pretty clear that we're looking at something that's going to be very long, ongoing, weeks, maybe months, and we have to see how it plays out.
We finished to fight here in this kibbutz after 48 hours, something like this. Wave after wave of Hamas terrorists. They surprised the kibbutz 6:30 in the morning in Saturday. 70 terrorists with full arm, full ability and capabilities, and you will see it's a big massacre, big disaster.
At the moment we're at the Kfar Aza settlement, 2.5 kilometers from Gaza. At the moment you are staying at the neighborhood of the youngsters. This is the bathroom, living room. Most of them were students with small families. Average ages are between 18 to 25. And this neighborhood was brutally attacked and slaughtered. RPG were shot, they burned everything. As you can see, they had no chance to survive.
You can see the whole village are ruined. You can see burned houses. You can see people inside that burned. You can see bones. You can see all the terrorists. It's horrible, There is no words that can describe it. It's kill you inside to see your country bleed.
Never. 40 years of service and so many difficult and hard you never saw something like this.
We don't want, but if we have, we will fight. We will win. There is no doubt about it.
accounts. New into NBC Tonight, a research group uncovering a network of dozens of accounts on X, formerly known as Twitter, spreading what's believed to be coordinated posts with disinformation about the war. Posts and videos that have been viewed millions of times. X started suspending some of the accounts after they were contacted by NBC News, but didn't otherwise have any comment. It's something we've seen a lot of over the past few days. Take this video saying Hamas militants started a new airstrike on Israel. You see that? That video. That is actually from a video game. That's not even real. You see the exact same video posted to YouTube here. Then there was this post claiming Israel bombed and destroyed an old Greek Orthodox church in Gaza. It has something like 3 million views. But the church itself said it hasn't been touched, that any other news is false. All of these posts now have disclaimers on the bottom if you go to X and look at the post, but they're not taken down. And some of them are posted from verified users, making it harder for people to know what's real. NBC News tech correspondent Jake Ward is joining us now. And Jake, these are just a couple of examples of this. These posts containing misinformation, disinformation, very difficult, especially at a moment like this when people are, frankly, desperate for information, turning to social media platforms. It is not a clear-cut picture.
It is not a clear-cut picture, Hallie. The past few days have just been this vivid lesson in the fact that you literally cannot trust what social media feeds you these days. And even more difficult is the surprise turn of events, which means that legitimate sources of information are slow to react because they were taken just as surprised as so many people were across Israel. So a very, very difficult moment. But as you say, there's just this proliferation of misleading content. And when it's not just made up, as in the case of the video game clip you're shown there, you know, it's out of context or out of time. This video of an attack by Israeli forces on Gaza is in fact what it purports to be, but it's from May, not from this current set of attacks. And so you have things out of time like that. Not only that, you have whole presidential proclamations being concocted out of thin air. This, there's a piece of Biden-looking, legitimate-looking Biden information that purports to say that $8 billion will be set aside for Israel. It's in fact a doctored copy of what you see there on the right, which is the $400 million that Biden put toward Ukrainian aid. You know, this is the kind of stuff that is coming fast and furious right now. And it's happening, of course, because social media is cutting back on the people who try to patrol this stuff. I mean, X, as you mentioned, is really the locus of so much of this stuff because they have cut back so many of their teams. Their elections integrity team, their trust and safety teams, all of those have been scaled back. X has had no comment for us on this, but they have been cutting back, we know from many reports and many sources. And that's also true across social media. You have Twitter, you have Meta, you have all these different companies cutting back on the very people that we trust to try and keep this stuff as reliable as possible, and that has just made the fog of war all that much deeper right now, Hallie.
You talk about the issue specifically as it relates to X, of course, old Twitter, basically. The EU, I mean, has put out this notice basically for Elon Musk to come and respond to X's role in the spread of some of this content, of this disinformation over there.
That's right. Here in the United States, misinformation is considered a scourge, but it's not fundamentally illegal. In the EU, it's different. Under the Digital Services Act, Thierry Breton, the commissioner, has sent Elon Musk this demand that he stop letting this stuff move around on the platform and that he'll face consequences if it doesn't stop immediately. He's given him 24 hours to do it. And so the EU really reminding us that, again, you cannot trust what comes to you on the social media feed. Really, the only reliable thing that we can do at this point, Hallie, is try to go out and find reliable information. Do not trust what's coming to you in the passive way that social media is built to feed it to you. You have to go find reliable sources, especially in difficult times like this, Hallie.
Jake Ward, thank you so much.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.
Israel is preparing for what could be an extended ground assault in the Gaza Strip against Hamas, a militant group that launched a surprise attack on the country over the weekend. The plans for an offensive came as Hamas militants threatened to execute Israeli hostages if the government continues to bombard civilian homes in Gaza without warning.
There's never been anything like this in the history of the region.
More than 900 Israelis and at least 687 Palestinians have been killed, with scores more injured and displaced. At least 11 U.S. citizens have died, according to President Biden. As the war heads into a fourth day, here's what you need to know. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the country was preparing for a mass offensive against Hamas. Dozens of tanks and hundreds of Israeli soldiers fanned out along the Gaza Strip border Monday.
בסיומה של המערכה, כל אויבינו ידעו שזאת הייתה טעות איומה לתקוף את ישראל. מה שנעשה לאויבינו בימים הקרובים יהדהד אצלם לדורות.
Parts of Gaza were largely reduced to rubble after Israel launched at least 130 airstrikes on Monday, some landing in the heart of Gaza City. The strikes came as Israeli officials called for a total siege on the Gaza Strip, which would cut off food, fuel, and electricity to more than 2 million Palestinians living in the enclave.
The people of the Gaza Strip, they've been largely isolated since the Israeli forces and civilians pulled out in 2005. Very few Palestinians are able to get out of the Gaza Strip, so they rely on Israel essentially for everything. Israel has told people to leave their homes and to move to other parts of the Gaza Strip, but they literally have nowhere to run to. They have nowhere to hide. They can't leave the Gaza Strip because it's completely closed off.
The humanitarian situation in Gaza was extremely dire before these hostilities. Now it will only deteriorate exponentially.
Hamas on Monday threatened to execute Israeli hostages unless the government ratchets back its bombardment of their Gaza sanctuary. Spokesman for Hamas said the group will be forced to broadcast the execution if the targeting continues.
In the past, Hezbollah and Hamas have captured a soldier here or a migrant worker there, but more than 100 Israelis, civilians, children, elderly women, young women, it's unprecedented. So it makes it incredibly complicated. Anytime Israel wants to try and carry out airstrikes, they're going to risk the possibility of killing some of these Israeli civilians.
While the Israeli military said it regained control over its southern towns, border breaches in other parts of the country have raised concerns. The military said it killed a number of armed suspects that crossed into Israel from Lebanon on Monday. No one has immediately claimed responsibility for the breach of the border. The Pentagon warned Iran and Hezbollah, a Lebanese militant group, to think twice before joining the conflict.
Another fear here is that there could be a new front opened on the Lebanon border with Hezbollah joining, and Hezbollah has much more effective long-range precision rockets. Israel has threatened essentially to bomb Lebanon back into the Stone Age if Hezbollah were to launch a fight like this. The war in 2006 was incredibly devastating to Beirut and parts of Lebanon. It's one of the reasons why Hezbollah has not engaged in the fight, because I think they realize that Israel is not going to hold back in any way this time. They've said that. But if they're fighting two fronts, it's incredibly difficult to know how it's going to end.
We are just learning that Israel says it's attacked 130 Hamas targets with dozens of planes over the course of the last 3 hours as a devastatingly bloody war has erupted. The Israeli defense minister says he's given the order to begin a, quote, complete siege 3 days after Hamas launched an attack by land, air, and sea. Major blasts rocked Gaza just minutes ago. Israeli airstrikes raining down on the Palestinian enclave. This days after the coordinated attack by Hamas. Israel says Islamist militants killed 700 people. The Israeli response to this weekend's attack also coming on the ground. Heavy armor and troops have been moving south. But any ground offensive will be complicated by Hamas and its allies holding hostages. The Islamist militants in Gaza claim to be holding more than 100 captives. And that's on top of Palestinian civilians on the ground who will likely be caught up in any fighting. Palestinian officials say more than 500 people have already been killed in Israeli strikes. All this as rocket fire from Gaza continues. Many of the rockets have been intercepted, but some have landed in Israeli territory. You can see the damage here where charred vehicles litter this street in southern Israel. And it's not just the south. There are growing concerns Lebanese militant group Hezbollah will enter the conflict and threaten Israel's northern frontier. Israel says it's already killed armed suspects who entered from the Lebanese side. And it says its helicopters are striking inside Lebanese territory. UN forces have reported explosions near a town on the Lebanese side of the border. For the latest, CNN's Becky Anderson is live in Tel Aviv, Israel. Becky, how have things been unfolding? You and I last spoke around 5 a.m. Eastern time. Quite a lot has happened since.
Yeah, this is central Israel. I've got line of sight down the road towards Gaza from here, about 50 miles, and I've got line of sight towards northern Israel here, the Lebanese border. And we are in central Israel, as I said, in Tel Aviv, where we have continued to hear all day the kind of low-level rumblings, booms, the Iron Dome intercepting incoming rockets from Gaza fired by Hamas towards Tel Aviv and Ben Gurion Airport. We've got some evidence this morning when an engineer was coming in that there was an explosion just south of the airport here. Everybody hit the deck there. And so, you know, the intensity of this, I think, is really the story of the hour, you know, and the fact that we have Gaza in play, Tel Aviv and Jerusalem hearing sirens because there are incoming attacks or incoming rockets from Hamas, and then to the north here, the potential for something significant happening on the Lebanese-Israeli border. It is a ratcheting up, there is no doubt, in what is this very bloody conflict, Casey.
All right, Becky Anderson in Tel Aviv. Stay safe, Becky. We will be coming back with you much more throughout this hour. But joining us now from Jerusalem is CNN's Ben Wiedemann. Ben, Jerusalem, of course, one of the places where these sirens have been heard. What's the latest there?
Yeah, Casey, about an hour and a half ago, we heard the sirens go off and then some distant thuds. We understand there may have been as many as 10 intercepts. And there are reports coming from the Israeli Medical Service that several people were injured on the outskirts of Jerusalem. It's not clear if that was an impact or, as I've seen myself before, when the Iron Dome intercepts incoming missiles, there's a lot of shrapnel that falls to the ground. So that may have been the cause for those injuries as this conflict intensifies. What we have heard so far today, for instance, Yoav Gallant, the Israeli defense minister, has ordered what he called a complete siege on Gaza, cutting off all food, electricity, and fuel to a place where 2 million people are living. Now, according to the World Food Program, 63% of the population of Gaza is, quote, food insecure. The Israelis are, of course, preparing, by all accounts, for a massive ground invasion into Gaza, sending lots of armor in that direction. Now, it's not clear how far they're going to go, but certainly in 2008, 2009, when there was a prolonged outbreak of violence between Gaza and Israel, the Israelis did cut the Gaza Strip in half, but they avoided going into population centers. In 2014, Israeli forces entered the Gaza Strip, but yet again avoided going into population centers. Now, the expectation is this time, given the gravity of the situation, the Israeli operation in Gaza will be much more extensive. It may take time for that to happen, but of course, what we're seeing is that there are, according to the Israelis today so far, 130 strikes in Gaza, they say, on Hamas targets. But what we've seen is that they seem to be have done away with what's known as the knock on the roof, where a small explosion is or explosive device is directed at the building. They plan on hitting as sort of a warning shot for people to leave. Sometimes the Israelis will actually call people in the building and tell them to evacuate. It doesn't seem to be happening at the moment. In Jabalia, in the northern part, in the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza, there was a strike earlier today. The extent of damage from the videos we're seeing is massive. There's talk of as many as 50 people being killed in that strike alone. And I think the expectation people in Gaza is that this is just the beginning of what's going to be a very long and difficult period.
Ben Wiedemann in Jerusalem, thank you very much for that. We're going to dive into all of this now with today's panel. Natan Sachs is the director of the Brookings Institution Center for Middle East Policy, Vivian Salama, a national security reporter for The Wall Street Journal, and David Sanger is CNN's political and national security analyst. He also serves as a White House and national security correspondent at The New York Times. And David, let me start with you because you have covered this your whole career, essentially, and can help us understand. Ben was walking us through some of what may happen in the Gaza Strip in the coming days. Really unprecedented.
It is, and it poses a whole series of dilemmas for Prime Minister Netanyahu, his government, for President Biden, as he tries to support the Israelis. So the first dilemma is, what do you do about the hostages? There are, as you said, more than 100. We've been reporting at the Times the number may be closer to 150. Clearly, some of those are also American citizens, although we don't know how many. But in any case, hostages for any society is a big deal, and for Israel, as you know, it's going to be a huge issue. So they've got competing instincts here. One is to go in to clear out Hamas, and the second is saving the lives of those hostages, and the hostages presumably are in tunnels or in the middle of Gaza. The second problem is, it's one thing to go into Gaza, which we have seen happen before, though not in a long time. It's another thing to stay in Gaza, right? And this is the same problem the United States faced when it went into Afghanistan, when it went into Iraq, because at some point, if you become an occupying force, you just get a constant guerrilla war. So the Israeli government's going to have to make a decision about how far does it want to go. And the third issue, and you're seeing it right in these pictures here, is going to be one of proportionality. Right? It's been tragic for the Israelis. We think there are about 700 dead. You could see numbers that went way above that fairly quickly if the Israelis sustain this kind of a campaign. And many Palestinians living in Gaza are not fans of Hamas.
Natan, this is a region you spend all of your time focused on. You obviously have deep ties to Israel itself. I mean, just talk about what David kind of laid out there and what you see being the next turn in Gaza.
Well, what's interesting, not interesting, tragic about this case is that it's not just another round. This is not just another repeat of previous times. In Israeli psyche, this is, to a large degree, Israel's 9/11. What happened on Saturday was so barbaric and so ostentatious in Israeli minds, and we haven't even seen all the pictures yet, that the mood in Israel is very different than it's been in the past. David spoke very well about the price that Israel would pay if it went in, and especially if it stayed there. But Israel is now willing to take prices, to take costs, and to also, take prices also from the Gazans, unfortunately, that it wasn't in the past. And so we could definitely see a massive invasion. We might also see even an attempt to take down Hamas, which is something Israel has never done. Since Hamas took over the Gaza Strip, taking Fatah out and taking over the Gaza Strip, we've seen Israel live with Hamas, of course an enemy, but at least an address they can deal with. Now, a lot of things have changed in Israel. I don't know if the government will decide to topple Hamas. It is not out of the question. It was in previous rounds. It's not today.
And Vivian, your paper has been reporting some of the origins of this. We obviously haven't quite jumped into the conversation about Iran yet at this table, but it certainly seems as though sources that are speaking to the Journal, they say, from Hamas and Hezbollah, are saying that, hey, Iran was deeply involved in this.
That's right. A number of my colleagues in the Middle East reported that Iran had basically cooked up a plan with leaders in Hamas and Hezbollah as well, trying to find a way to essentially execute this plan. The administration here in Washington denies that. They say they haven't actually seen any direct evidence of direct involvement by Iran in this particular case, but they say there's no doubt that Iran over the past few years has been arming, equipping, funding, advising Hamas fighters. And so, whether or not they were directly involved, it remains to be seen. The U.S. doesn't have that intel yet, which then raises the question again of the intelligence, what America knew, what Israel knew.
Republicans warning terrorists could be infiltrating America's wide-open border after the horrific attacks in Israel. Over 150 people on the FBI's terror watch list have been arrested crossing into the U.S. so far this year, and that has Kevin McCarthy sounding this alarm.
Just in this year alone, there's 151 from 160 different countries. In my own state, we caught 2 coming from Yemen on the terrorist watch list, from China and others. Why are they coming to America? What do they have planned? And who are they communicating with? President Biden has said previously that he believes the #1 threat to America is facing is climate change. The #1 threat killing Americans is terrorism. The ` threat is an open border.
A shocking new congressional report finding that the Biden administration has failed to remove 99% of illegal immigrants released into the country. And new Border Patrol data shows thousands of special interest aliens from places like Syria, Yemen, Iran, and Afghanistan have come into the U.S. illegally. Greg, you alluded to this in the A block as saying that, yes, we've got a problem there, but we've got a serious problem here on our own border.
Yeah, I mean, the non-border is actually a symptom of absolute weakness. In this country, I don't know why, but in the last, I'd say 20 years, we've demonized strength as a characteristic of the oppressor. So anytime you exercise any kind of strength, discipline, or will, that's somehow wrong. It's the same way that we handcuffed the police during the riots or commerce in response to shoplifting or any kind of crime. We are governed by the weakest group of people in our nation's history. You could grab a class of auto mechanics from a trade school, put them in charge, and you'd get a better outcome because weak men love weak borders. I mean, even the world of Barbie had a border. I don't know if you saw that movie. But again, I mean, we talked about, he said the biggest threat was climate change. He also said the biggest domestic threat was white supremacy.
Right.
Think of the opportunity cost there. What we lost in safety and security because Joe preferred to indulge the left-wing drug called identity politics because, it made those faculty lounges like him. We are now in a state of weakness where we are at our most vulnerable. We never at a time of day we had such a weak administration and such a huge threat to coincide at the same time.
Judge, the other thing that comes to mind is that it's not just that you have people on the terror watch list coming across the border illegally and staying in one place. Now they could be anywhere in the country. And how do you track them?
They can be anywhere, and we're not going to track them because we don't. I mean, we let them in. I think it was in 2021, as you said, 99% of the migrants who came in are staying in the United States, and that's 2 million people. 99%. Now let's talk about Hamas. If anybody thinks that Hamas is not already in this country, I think they're naive, because when you think about it, that what happened in Israel is about the extinction of the Jewish race. It's not about territory. And if Hamas hates Jews, you know that they're in this country as well. And what the Biden administration has done is he has allowed a wholesale entrance. He's made this country nothing more than a global landing spot with benefits. No questions, no DNA, no nothing. And even if they do tell you you have to go to court, you don't have to go for another 6 or 7 years.
Right.
I mean, we look like fools on the world stage. And, Michael Waltz, congressman, indicated that there's a history of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps working with the Mexican drug cartels to enter through our open border. So and think about it. Israel is the little Satan. We are the great Satan. We are inextricably tied to Israel, and we have allowed Hamas to come into this country along with all kinds of people. 1.5 million getaways. We don't even know who they are.
Right.
We got a problem.
And if they would have even been on the terror watch list, because you don't know. Brian?
It was an opportunity. So he knows he's got a huge problem on the border, not because Greg says so, although he should be listening to you, but because the mayor of New York City, the mayor of Chicago, the governor of Massachusetts, the governor of New York, everyone is telling him, you got a huge problem here. Now this happens. In that speech that mostly was good, he could have said, listen, Title 42 is back in place. This is our version of the pandemic. If my number one thing as a president of the United States is keep the American people safe, I don't want to take any chances. I just saw the number that Dana put up. It has Iranians that have come here, 659 over the last 2 years on the terror watch list. So I think that this is a reason, not on the terror watch list, but have come through here and have registered. I think that's a problem. Pakistan as well. They've been a problem in the past. Syria is a big terror state, 538. Yemen as well. So I think the president used this opportunity. I'm putting Title 42, and I'm going to be tight on Iran. He'd have better prospects on the election, to be really cynical.
How about just close the border?
Yeah, but he needs an apparatus to do his job, evidently.
Last word to you, Jessica.
You never want to be on the wrong end of a declarative statement like X is the biggest threat, right? Because something else can show up. I mean, before 9/11, we didn't think that there would be terrorists that got pilots' licenses and were hiding out, in and around us, and then were able to take nearly 3,000 lives, right? But that's the expectation now, that something like that is possible. So of course it is possible that somebody, God forbid, could leak through on a border. But it is important to consider the facts about this, at least up until this point. So I went back and looked at testimony from someone who works at the Cato Institute. He went before the Subcommittee on Immigration, Integrity, Security, and Enforcement in September. He said 0 Americans have been injured or killed in terrorist attacks by illegal immigrants or asylum seekers who entered through the southern border. And over the period from 1975 to 2022, the chance of being murdered in an attack by a foreign-born terrorist was 1 in 4.3 million per annum. That's just important to consider in all of this. I understand that you want certain things from President Biden. I don't necessarily think, and this isn't because I don't care about the border, that today's speech was about that. Today's speech was about Israel, and he had just gotten off the phone with Netanyahu, who obviously expressed to him what his priorities were in terms of what he'd like to hear. But do keep that in the back of your mind as you say that now, like Kevin McCarthy, this is the #1 threat. Based on the data, it absolutely isn't.
Until it is.
Until it is.